The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Tuesday, January 24th, 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. We have a jammed-packed episode today. Starting out with the fact that we are at least 37 mass shootings into the year with only 24 days into the year so far. America is breaking all of its previous records with the cruelty and the brutality that exists when we worship guns in this nation. Also in this episode, I will be speaking with activists and family members of DJ Broadus, who was killed 5 years ago. Today is his birthday. The family is commemorating his birthday and still fighting for justice, particularly against Florida's Stand Your Ground law. When you hear the details of this story and how DJ Broadus was killed and how there was all but a cover-up, obstruction of justice, to say the least, yet they cannot get criminal charges for murder against the man who killed their loved one.
DJ Broadus's case and how heartbreaking it is that today is his birthday and his son can't hug him and he doesn't have justice and he doesn't have a reason. He said he was looking for justice, but it's hard to find. Hopefully there'll be an answer soon. This sounds like the legacy of lynching in America.
That was the voice of Donna Davis of Black Lives Matter Tampa. I'll be discussing DJ Broadus with her, Michael Sampson, and the sister of DJ, Alana Broadus, in today's episode. Also, I had a chance to speak with Jim Stewartson. He is an anti-disinformation activist and the co-host of the Radicalized podcast, and we spoke at length about the ongoing psychological operations warfare, the PSYOPs, that's happening here in the United States of America, that is perhaps one of the number one tools of the Christof fascists, the theocratic fascists, who are in part being led by none other than the disgraced National Security Advisor and retired General Michael Flynn.
So Mike Flynn in Afghanistan and Iraq was fighting ISIS. He learned the techniques of ISIS while he was there because he was fighting them. When he came back from there, he commissioned a paper on collecting all of the ISIS techniques and radicalization techniques so that he could recapitulate it in the United States.
You definitely don't want to miss that interview, but let's begin with the fact that there have been at least 37 mass shootings with 4 or more injuries or deaths occurring in the United States since January 1st, according to Forbes magazine, meaning that this year has already set a decade-long record for the most in the month of January, according to the Archive, which has kept statistics on shootings since 2014. Forbes is also reporting that the previous high was last year, January, for 34 shootings. We have already passed that in the first 24 days of 2023. We were all shocked over the weekend as a 72-year-old man stormed into a Lunar New Year celebration and killed now 11 individuals. Yesterday, there was another mass shooting by another elderly man of Asian descent in Half Moon Bay, California, leaving 7 dead. And also yesterday, a mass shooting in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where 12 were injured. One of the injured has been paralyzed. And so to all of the Republicans and conservatives who have taken the shooting in Monterey Park that was committed by an elderly Asian man, conservatives have taken this time to try to make a political point that no one is concerned about it because in this instance, it wasn't a white conservative man who did the killings. The reality of it is we simply can't keep up with all of the shootings anyway, regardless of who's committing them. Mass shootings happen so much in this country, we can't go a day. We have more mass shootings than we have had days in the year. And why? Whatever the individual motivations are, I'm sure they're connected to some part of American culture, some part of the American psyche that pushes us to rage and want to kill someone because that's what America is. That's what America does. But most of all, it's because we make guns accessible to a population of over 330 million people who, quite frankly, are all living on edge at any moment of any given point of the day. Notwithstanding the fact that most of these shootings are rooted, quite frankly, rooted in the hatred and the racism that is represented by conservative white men. And that these particular shootings over the weekend were not committed by them is, quite frankly, an anomaly. But it simply does not matter who's committing it. People are dying. And people are dying because in this cesspool of the United States of America, where the cruelty is the point, where everyone is trained to believe that somebody owes them something, that they're entitled to someone else's love, they're entitled to someone else's attention, they're entitled to someone else obeying them. Like, we have the most twisted and perverse mindset in this country. And it is that way, not because of a lack of morality. It is that way because that's what makes money. This country is driven by selfishness, ego, pride. And whenever the ego is not rewarded, people lash out. And when you put a gun in their hands, people die. That's just one category of why people do these types of things. The other is bigotry. Quite honestly, it is rooted in the hatred and the bigotry that is being fomented from the top of this country all the way down to the bottom. The shootings at the LGBTQ nightclubs, the shootings at black churches, the shootings in predominantly black neighborhoods at grocery stores, Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, committed by a conservative white man. There are many categories of why we have mass shootings. Hatred and bigotry that is part and parcel of the conservative identity is just one of them. But what do they all have in common? The common denominator is the fact that guns are readily accessible for anyone with a bruised ego to go out and lash out through violence. And now we have gotten to the point where we have more shootings than we have days of the year. And we simply do not have the political will or the wherewithal to do anything about it. So what does that mean? That means there's probably going to be another mass shooting this week. That means there's certainly going to be another mass shooting before February. Not because any of us want them, not because we wish for them, not because we want to say, I told you so, but because this is what America is. And until we stop worshiping guns in this country, until we stop worshiping violence, until we stop worshiping selfishness, ego, and pride, and elevating those things as the most important things, there's nothing worse than a bruised ego. Until we stop doing those things in this country, we're still going to see mass shootings in this country. And my earnest plea and my earnest prayer is that we can change this sooner rather than later. The family of DJ Broadus II is still seeking justice 5 years later after he was killed at the hands of Garner Kent Frazier, who is the son of a retired sheriff's deputy from Baker County, Florida. The only charge that Frazier faced was tampering with evidence, for which he was only sentenced to 1 year in prison. And despite being found guilty of tampering with evidence at the scene, murder charges were never brought against Frazier because of Florida's stand your ground law. And today, the family and activists continue to organize, calling for justice for DJ Broadus and for the charges of murder to be brought against Garner Kent Frazier, even as the family celebrates the birthday of DJ.
Today, DJ would have been 36. Me and DJ are actually 13 months apart. So today, 5 years ago, actually the last day that I saw him on his birthday, a week before he was killed. We had actually met in Orlando because I was in Orlando doing a training session with this company I was working with. And he came to Orlando for a few days. And we actually had spent some time together. His son always celebrates his birthday. So ever since he's passed, him and his mom always celebrate his birthday, which I really, really love. Like, she makes sure he never forgets his dad's birthday.
Dominic Broadus lost his life on the Frazier property. This property is where they used to have Klan rallies decades ago. The Frazier family, which has been entrenched in white supremacy politics in the state for a long time. Guard Frazier, his father was a Baker County Sheriff's police officer who used to be a Jacksonville Sheriff's officer. We met the family of one of the victims that he actually T-boned while on duty, left a woman paralyzed, suffered no consequences. He actually shot an African-American man when he was with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. I believe he left him paralyzed, suffered no consequences besides losing his job, and then was able to go to Baker County And even that whole family, that family lineage in Baker County still has a lot of impact and strength. J.E. Frazier was the head of the Ku Klux Klan in the mid 1900s. They share the same last name. So this is, when we talk about white supremacy, we're talking practically. We're talking families of influence that have entrenched control over legal institutions and perpetuate that and carry that out.
DJ Broadus's case and how heartbreaking it is that today is his birthday and his son can't hug him and he doesn't have justice and he doesn't have a reason. He said he was looking for justice, but it's hard to find. Hopefully there'll be an answer soon. And this is the world that we're living in. This sounds like the legacy of lynching in America, nepotism, cronyism in America. And I am hopeful that as we continue to work with the family, that they will be able to say that their march towards justice was victorious.
My mom, she doesn't really like to talk about it a lot, but his civil trial starts May the 1st. So that's the one that we're really hoping that Caden will really benefit from. It's an organization that my dad is a part of in Florida. I think it's called, it's like the dads who lost their son. And I'm not sure of the dad's name, but it is one dad that he does communicate with, that he lost his son. I'm not sure. I believe it was after DJ. I haven't really talked to him much about it because, I don't know, just the fact of talking about DJ, it really hurts and I don't really like talking about it. I choose when I want to have a discussion with my dad when it comes to DJ.
This was a family that had been victimized by Guard Frazier, and this family of influence was able to escape justice, escape accountability due to the fact that we have very much a white supremacist injustice system here in the state of Florida. And I'm sure elsewhere, of course, not just in the state of Florida, but especially here where you have this new Confederacy that still reigns supreme. Even if you go to the Baker County courthouse, they still have murals of the Ku Klux Klan on the walls, and they refuse to take it down. So imagine trying to seek justice in a courthouse that still celebrates the legacy of the Klan. And that's why we fight for justice. That's why so many people have gotten involved in the struggle to fight for justice for Dominic Broadus, for DJ Broadus, because we understand that this could have been any of us, especially in the state of Florida, especially in the Deep South, which is why we must continue to organize and fight and unite.
What we have known as a resident of South Georgia and North Florida is that a lot of the times when people think of our paradisical state, they think of sandy beaches, they think of breezy river walks, they think of palm trees. As someone whose mother was a sharecropper, with its brutal post-emancipation, still very slavery-like sharecropping systems, where my mother was taken out of school at 7 years old and never went back to school. And so what's happening to Black people in that part of the country, people don't really understand. They think Florida, Miami, dolphins, manatees, but they don't understand that the northern part of Florida on the Tallahassee side borders Alabama. The northern part of Florida on the eastern side borders Georgia. And so our legacy makes us more of a cultural kin of South Georgia and lower Alabama, which they call Tallahassee, than the sunny beaches of even Tampa and Clearwater.
Think about in Baker County how many Dominic Broaduses unfortunately have happened historically, in which a Black man was killed and his death not treated the same as a white man. That's, Ella Baker, until the killing of a white man is treated as the same as a Black man. But out of this, we've seen a movement. In Baker County, we had town halls in Baker County with Black clergy. We had a rally, a march in Baker County where you had hundreds of Baker County residents actually participate. This was their first time participating in a march. 2020 was a lot of people's first time participating in resistance, hitting the streets. And a lot of them didn't even look like us, And I think the, white supremacy, Ron DeSantis, these new type of fascist Republicans, they kind of see that and they want to be proactive in kind of stomping that out. But, they're just simply, in my opinion, they're burying seeds, because we're going to grow and we're going to sprout and this movement is going to keep going. And, I think even the struggle for justice for Dominic Broadus Jr., I mean, that is an example of this is a struggle that's been happening for years and years, but it's growing. It's becoming more potent, and we're organizing. And this is something that they wouldn't have seen even 20 years ago. We
work directly with families. Often there are financial challenges. People are unable to work in the aftermath. They need to apply for Social Security disability because they cannot go on. Going to rallies with families. One point we called a family and they said, we can't even host a vigil. This is a Latin family up in Lakeland. And they said, we can't even host a vigil. We went down there and someone from our team read the rosary in the rain. It was the saddest thing you've ever seen in your life. The children sitting on the spot where their father was murdered. The Joseph family that I worked with for years here, finally victorious, $15 million verdict for them. I worked with them for a year when nobody thought that was over and it was gone. We brought that issue back to fore. So the work with the families has been a big thing.
But one of the things that we do here in Jacksonville is work closely with the families. We've worked closely with Mr. Broadus. He's been an incredible fighter. The whole family, has been very active in his fight for justice. We work with mothers who've had because they are the fuel of the movement. I think any movement that doesn't center those folks mostly directly affected by police terror, by racist vigilantism, is a movement that won't win. And those people are the fuel and they inspire us every day.
What's happening with this family, what people don't understand is that when we have these events, when we do what we do, those families are left with their beds and their pillows at night. They're left with stones with names on them. They don't get anything from any of this. This is their life for the rest of their life. And if you've ever lost anyone, you know that grief doesn't go away.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. We've been covering Ron DeSantis's banning of AP African American history in the state of Florida. And yesterday, he expanded the reason. He sidestepped when asked about it. He gave a secondary reason as to why this course should be banned throughout the state. And I want to play the clip for you, but I want you to listen very closely how he throws in, what he throws in order to try to muddy the waters and deflect from his pure racism. Take a listen in.
We want education, not indoctrination. If you fall on the side of indoctrination, we're going to decline. If it's education, then we will do this course. So when I heard it didn't meet the standards, I figured, they may be doing serious. It's way more than that. This course on Black history, what's one of the lessons about? Queer theory. Now, who would say that an important part of Black history is queer theory? That is somebody pushing an agenda on our kids.
Queer theory. That's what he's going with. You know why he's going with that? The same reason, the real reason I'm even covering this today is because yesterday you could see the handiwork of conservatism at play in the Black community. Yes, yesterday there was a news article released by the New York Post that has since been retracted that identified a single Twitter user that identified themselves as trans. And that single Twitter user called for the removal of Aretha Franklin's hit song, You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. I need you to stick with me as I connect these dots for you. Within less than 2 to 3 hours, every major influencer, every major Black influencer on Instagram was sharing that article, sharing it and enraging the Black community because they made it seem as though the trans community was attacking our beloved Aretha Franklin. Turns out that's not the case. It was fake news. It has since been retracted by the New York Post, which should never be believed in the first place when you consider the origins, the billionaire conservative influencers that controlled that outlet. Now, I'll discuss this a lot more in the patrons only section because I want to get to this interview with Jim Stewartson. But I want to say this. The damage was done. And one of the number one things that the conservative movement absolutely needs is for the Black community at large, because it's not like we don't have LGBTQ people in our community. We have plenty. We have plenty of people in Black history who were queer, which is why we should teach queer history. We should teach about James Baldwin. We should teach about Bayard Rustin. We should teach about all of the intellectuals who contributed to the civil rights movement but could not be who they were because at the time it was simply not acceptable to be openly queer or gay. We should teach about those, but I'll get to this in the patrons only portion. But I gotta say this before I move on. The conservative movement is 100% committed to dividing Black people from the LGBTQIA community because they need us to remain in silos. Each group trying to fight for civil rights, but neither group willing to work with each other. And you know what that is? That is a win for white supremacy. I'll talk about it more in the patrons only episode, patreon.com/the BPD show. Here is part one of my interview with Jim Stewartson, who is a disinformation activist. He is pushing back against the QAnon psychological operations that this country is absolutely under. Now, this is a part of my ongoing series on Christian nationalism and the rise of theocratic fascism and the all-out threat against democracy that we are quite frankly living under right now. Here's Jim as he discusses the nature of these online cults and how Michael Flynn, former national security advisor underneath Donald Trump and disgraced retired general, how he is using these psychological operations to indoctrinate American citizens.
Cults and brainwashing have been around for a long time, but you used to have to, either lure someone or kidnap them and then bring them to a compound, right? So that you could remove all of the outside influence, from them. So cults existed, but they were much rarer. They were smaller. But now with social media, that insulation that you used to need to be in, the David Koresh Waco compound, now you just need to fall down the right rabbit hole on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. That's the fundamental thing that I think we have not grasped yet as a society, is that, Jim Jones and David Koresh and, all of these cult leaders over time, they did exactly the same thing that's being done to our fellow citizens online. And we can't allow that to happen and not expect, unfortunately, similar results. So Mike Flynn in Afghanistan and Iraq was fighting ISIS, right? He learned the techniques of ISIS while he was there because he was fighting them. So when he came back from there, and there was a lot of drama around, his exit from there, he commissioned a paper on collecting all of the ISIS techniques and radicalization techniques so that he could recapitulate it in the United States.
Now, to be sure, these events by Michael Flynn, they rival that of Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA in terms of size, in terms of glamour, in terms of stagemanship, showmanship, and in terms of reach. They are reaching hundreds of thousands of Americans every single week with the indoctrination that Michael Flynn perfected by studying ISIS.
So when you look at the events that he does, these Reawaken America tour events, and even going back to, Pizzagate, the whole Save the Children mantra that they have, the lies and propaganda about child trafficking, how the Democrats and the evildoers are coming for your kids. Those are exactly the same techniques that ISIS used to draw in, especially women, into their theocratic death cult. Right? ISIS was a theocratic death cult, and Mike Flynn is literally doing the same thing on American soil in churches all across the country. He brings these traveling psychological operations to churches and puts people through 20 to 30 hours of the most vicious propaganda you can possibly imagine. Racism and transphobia, homophobia. It is a stew of violent eliminationist rhetoric. And it is happening every single day in the open. And no one is really talking about it. We are currently under attack. That's the big problem, in my view, that we have, is that both the government and the press sort of refuse to point out the elephant in the room, which is that there's a psychological war going on.
So this begs the question, what can be done about it? What, if anything, can the government do about a psychological warfare that's occurring on our soil, across our airwaves, on social media, that's being waged by American citizens on American citizens?
I think the fundamental problem is that the people who are doing this operation are Americans. You can't, and there are good reasons for this, right? Deploy the military against American citizens. Most of our PSYOPs specialists are in the military, but they can't do anything about Mike Flynn because he's an American citizen on American soil. They can't really do anything about it, right? Which is part of the reason why why I do what I do, which is to try and give people the awareness and the tools to at least understand what is going on so that they can take their own defensive and countermeasures to it. I don't see how the government in its current structure can go after all these American citizens running this operation. Unfortunately, it needs to be a counterintelligence investigation, at the FBI. But guess what? The guy who was in charge of counterintelligence at the FBI was literally just indicted for being a Russian asset.
He's referring to Charles McGonigal, who was the former head of counterintelligence for the FBI's New York office. He is accused of laundering money, violating sanctions against Russia, all while working with a Russian oligarch. While still at the FBI, according to NBC News, McGonigal took hundreds of thousands of dollars from a foreign national and former foreign intelligence official.
I think we've got a major problem with not being able to look at this face in the problem, to look at the Russian, influence that we have, and to recognize it as a war, because the government can't do much about it. That said, what they could do and what our corporations can do is stop the major arteries of propaganda into the public consciousness. Remove Telegram from the Apple and Google stores. Telegram is just a enormous cult indoctrination system at this point, at least in America. Rumble is Peter Thiel's video website that is literally 100% Kremlin propaganda. We could do something about these things. But Elon Musk, as you were saying before, taking over Twitter doesn't help anything because he's just letting all the Nazis back on. But our government could, and if we put pressure on companies like Apple and Google, we could alleviate the flood of propaganda, and that would allow some people to get free of it.
That's all the time we have for the public show. The remainder of the conversation will be available to patrons only. Patreon.com/the BPD show. Everyone else, I'll see you tomorrow.